This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a widely debated topic, and with supporters emphasizing its role in creating fair opportunities and critics questioning its implementation. Those on one side claim that society is trying to socially engineer gender and a race to be a main focus in corporate, government, or educational practices. Others view themselves as fighting for marginalized communities and ending cultural barriers. Now, of course, you couldn't have missed the news. Recently, Donald Trump signed an executive order altering federal hiring and contracting policies, shifting the focus from DEI considerations to individual performance and merit-based assessments. At least that's what we've been told. And recently, get this, a judge granted an injunction attempting to block this as it likely violates free speech. So, how could we miss this? What a topic to discuss. And we're here to speak with some experts tonight. Anne-Marie, Nathan, Viola, and John, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Anne-Marie, I want to quickly throw this one over to you. And I'm curious, where did DEI or even originate from? That's kind of what this first segment's about. Give me the rundown.
You know, DEI is a term that probably showed up, over the last 20 years. But really, the nature of the work has been around forever, right? So diversity and inclusion used to be the term, maybe I would say 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And then we added E for equity, maybe in the last 8 to 10 years, because we realized that equity was fundamental to creating a diverse and inclusive workplace, community, environment. But at the end of the day, it was originally maybe based on employment equity and also accessibility and anti-discrimination to abide by the laws. But now it's really evolved into, it's not just something that we have to do because of the law, but it's good for business, it's good for community, and it's good for creating a human-centered, a human rights approach to building a more socially cohesive society.
Well, thank you for that. And the language around DEI, from what I understand, has kind of evolved. I mean, when we look at the last, 50, 60, 70 years. I mean, this goes back to when we came over to North America, and you had conversations around diversity, inclusion, in a lot of different areas, not just in education systems, but corporate and government as well. Nathan, from your perspective here, how has the language around DEI changed over the last, I mean, honestly, I would say I have, 60s and 70s here, but how has it changed?
Yeah, I think in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the focus was on human and civil rights legislation, right? Changing in the laws against blatant discrimination, making that illegal. But what ended up happening is circumvention, right? With new rules that created new ways of excluding, new ways of segregating, new ways of othering. So things like hiring folks, but not paying them fairly or not getting the promotion. So language evolved to meet the pain points of the time. So in this decade, I think you'll hear terms like microaggressions, psychological safety, gaslighting, getting more momentum to capture the nuances of experiences. Because when people hear terms like discrimination, racism, sexism, they often have particular words or actions in their minds of what that looks and sounds like. So as language develops, it gives people the tools to better understand and speak about very complex social interactions and feelings. And this evolution in language isn't just about naming new problems, it's about making the invisible visible.
Okay, so John, I want to throw this over to you. We have about 30 seconds here on your point. When you hear what Nathan and Anne-Marie say around DEI, from your perspective, how has the language shifted, and has it shifted for the better?
I think the language has gotten very confusing. I think many years ago when the civil rights movement was full steam and people like Martin Luther King were speaking clearly about ending division, I think that was very obvious. I think actually now the language has actually become more divisive and it might be counterproductive. Although I'll admit that I don't think it's out of bad intentions. I think that it's out of well intentions, but I just don't think it's working as people anticipated, and it might actually be counterproductive.
Interesting. Well, we'll get into it more in the second segment. Viola, you have about 15 seconds here. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think I think for me, like the language has definitely shifted. Like Nathan has pointed out before, it was based on compliance, but now we're seeing more inclusion and belonging. And then right now we're really shifting to equity and anti-racism. That's the lens that we're trying to do. And there's like still
I've
a
got to
huge
cut
need
you
for
off here.
DEI.
I've got to cut you off here, Viola,
Yeah.
but we'll jump right back into it. We'll be right back. Thank you.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're continuing the conversation. Once a corporate priority, now it's become a point of debate. We've got companies like PepsiCo, Target, and Walmart reportedly scaling back or at least reevaluating certain aspects of their DEI programs. We've seen huge controversies spark. Is DEI evolving or unraveling? It's something to discuss. But first, let's take a look at what MyGeneration at a university had to say about this issue. Today, we're talking to individuals at a certain university around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what their thoughts are. I have no idea what to expect. Let's go. When you hear DEI, what comes to your mind?
Diversity, equity, inclusion.
I think of inclusion.
It means is making a space where like everyone feels comfortable and like safe.
Diversity.
It's really important to include everyone, regardless of whatever you see.
We need diversity and typically involving like diversity hires.
Trump made an executive order to get rid of DEI. Do you feel like that's a step forward or a step backwards?
Shift in direction, maybe he's trying something new.
Backward. He's not inclusive at all.
Is it good to make a decision based off of hiring a non-marginalized group or a marginalized group?
I would only hire them based on the person that they are today.
Hire someone that they feel like is the best suitable.
Like you have the values and the qualities that they value more.
Based off of skin color or religious background, is that fair?
No.
So clearly, MyGeneration, at least what I got from it, seems to be a little bit confused, or the lines to them may have blurred. And the conversation on DEI, what I'm starting to realize is there's a bigger umbrella than what maybe you originally think. And that was something that kind of struck me when I was researching for this show. John, I want to ask you really quickly, and then Viola, we'll jump over to you. In recent years, has DEI evolved for the positive or for the negative within government, organizations, corporations, education systems, that kind of thing? Have they evolved in a positive way, or are you seeing, you mentioned the lines are getting a little blurred.
It depends on which perspective you're looking at it. I'm sure that there's many groups that have found advantages in the policies. So if you're speaking from their perspective, you're going to find a lot of positive stories and anecdotes. I think the government, as far as the government's concerned, I think that it might actually be causing, like I said earlier, more division than cohesion. And I think that's starting to scare a lot of the politicians. I noticed yesterday in the Liberal debate, it didn't come up at all four candidates on stage. They barely talked. I don't even think they talked about it. So where 10 years ago, it was like the number one topic.
Interesting. Now, Viola, I want to throw it over to you. Do you feel that we've seen that kind of change for the better in companies, organizations? I'm hearing some of these fighting arguments from these big corporations scaling back. Is that a sign for something?
Yeah, I think it definitely has like a ripple effect ever since like US has done this executive order. But studies have shown that diverse teams really can drive innovation and business success. And we've had like lots of studies that can prove that. So I think the real issue is poorly implemented DEI, not DEI itself.
Okay, so I want to jump on that. And Anne-Marie, I want to jump over to you because my question is, what is diversity? Like when I think of diversity, there's kind of two different ways you can think about it. Okay, do we have people with different ethnic or different genders, men, women, different people with different sexual orientations within companies? Do we make that the primary focus, or diversity from a more broader range of, we come from different backgrounds, we bring in different ideas? Because to me, that's two different things. Or is that all in the same, Anne-Marie?
No, they're different things. And, diversity essentially, as a definition, is all the ways in which we differ. And so there are various dimensions of diversity. A lot of it is visible and a lot of it is invisible, right? And so it is that intersectionality of all of the pieces that make us who we are. And as soon as you've got two people in the room, you've got diversity. So I think that we want to be broader in our understanding of diversity and how it shows up in individuals and in interactions in the workplace. Having said that, within diversity, if you add the lens of equity and inclusion, then we have to recognize that historically there have been groups that have been systematically, let's say, underemployed or unemployed in the Canadian marketplace, right?
That's not statistically true though. Like if you actually look, Stats Canada says that Asians and East Indians over a 20-year study are the highest earners, and they're actually doing very well in STEM. And it said that white people were at basically in the middle. So I don't actually like there. You can always find studies, but like that was Stats Canada, and they basically found that as they said.
But those are two examples that you shared, right? And within even the Asian community isn't a monolith, and there are particular Asian groups that have more systemic barriers than others.
I'ma rule the world, yeah, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. 해가 지고 뜰 때까지 I'ma, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
I had to do the segment on merit versus quotas because it's a debate at the heart of the hiring, education, and opportunity issue we've seen on DEI across media outlets. Should talent alone decide success, or do we need policies to level the playing field? Some argue quotas correct systemic biases, while others say that they undermine true achievement. I mean, where do we draw the line? We were talking about the lines necessarily being blurred, and it's interesting to kind of hear. It seems both sides may agree with that. We were talking a little bit about the statistics, but merit versus quotas is a big discussion on this front. When you hear merit versus quota, Nathan, give me a quick 20 seconds into what you think of when you hear merit versus quotas.
I think it contributes to the misinformation that creating this false dichotomy and the shift in the conversation from whether intervention is needed, which is a distraction, to why inequities exist in the first place and what structures maintain them. And so we need to remove this false dichotomy of merit versus quota, which assumes that merit has historically functioned fairly, when in reality, access to opportunities has always been shaped by systemic barriers, biases, and power structures.
Okay, so when we look at, I'll give it a public example. I was doing some research on this to see if this was necessarily true, and there's a pretty decently fought lawsuit right now on the FAA on not hiring over 1,000 workers due to they're not meeting DEI quotas. Are these quotas what blurring the lines are? Like, is that in the same conversation? Viola, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's like a key misunderstanding, is that like DEI is about favoring a certain group of people, favoring minorities. In reality, I think we need to focus on removing historical barriers
But what does that look like? When we talk about removing historical barriers, I just want to get a little bit more in the nitty gritty of that, because historical barriers. Okay, so I understand, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we had strong marginalized groups, but do we still have it today as potent as it was back in the 60s when women were fighting for the right to vote in comparison today? Like, is it still that serious?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point to raise. And I think research, I've also just recently read that discrimination against Black workers, this trend has not really declined. And then discrimination against Latino workers has also only declined so slightly. So this fight needs to continue, and there's still a huge need that we need to continue pushing.
I might be quoted incorrectly on this, but I am going to say it because what I was researching, I thought that this point might be brought up, but for every dollar that a white Canadian makes, apparently it's 97 cents to the dollar of what a Black Canadian makes. That's pretty close. And to me, I'm like, okay, so the 3 cents there maybe leaves room for maybe it's just a variety of different positions. Maybe ethnic groups go to specific positions they're just more inclined to. John, I want to throw it over to you. There's currently a state of Missouri filed a lawsuit on February 11th claiming that Starbucks violated federal and state laws against discriminating on race and sex, basically against DEI practices in Starbucks in Missouri. Like, what do you make of that? Is that an example of when it's going too far?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think we all agree that equality of opportunity is important, and I think that you should strive for that. when you start legislating racial groups into the workplace, it becomes almost it's a different form of racism. Like I think if you view the world through race, whether it's positively or negatively, it's racist. It's racism. If you see it through capital, you're a capitalist. If you view it through sex, you're a sexist. So even if you're looking at a company and you're trying to be positive and you're basically saying like this group needs to be working here, this group needs to be working there, and you're only breaking it down through race, you're dividing and it's discriminatory.
Yeah,
But
and
I
if I can
think
just add to that as well, I think that we're not just, for those of us who are doing this work every day, we are not just looking at one factor, typically race or gender, right? We are looking at the
But
person, and
I
we're
just want
looking
to
at what
stop.
the
I don't find a
organization
lot of
needs.
diversity in
And
thought.
then
I
we want
find
to
like
level
most
the
it's
playing
mostly
field so
liberals.
that it's
Like
not
DEI
based
is mostly
on,
for liberals.
like it's not based on the barrier, but it's based on actually leveling the playing field so that
But
equally
how
qualified
often do you push
individuals
for
can apply for
conservative?
jobs.
But like,
So
how often do you tell companies they should hire more conservatives to make a more politically dynamic group? Because like, I find like DEI is usually for racialized groups that are liberals, because there are many that aren't
Nathan, I
liberals
want to
that
jump
are.
Not
in.
true at
John,
all.
let me just quickly
Yeah.
jump in. Nathan, it looks like you got something to say. So I want to give you got about 20 seconds here, so make it quick.
Yeah, I think the hope is to have a place where race, gender, these things do not matter. But the reality is that these groups are still facing these experiences. And so taking a colorblind approach where
In
we
Canada,
say we're not looking at these issues anymore just ignores the issues.
I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Here to continue our conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're joined by Anne-Marie, Nathan, Viola, and John. We're having a great conversation. We're really getting to the heart of the issue, and that's kind of the goal here. We've got 5 minutes, so let's try to make it articulate, and let's see if we can get down to what the future of DEI policies might become, because I think that's one thing that people are genuinely going to care about. I want to throw this over to Viola. Viola, where do you see DEI policies headed? And I want you to be specific on gender. I want you to be specific on race, religious beliefs, and all of the other differences or diversities that make DEI a thing.
Yeah, I think so. Just to kind of conclude from like everything that we have talked about, I think it's our collective hope that it will shift away from quotas toward fairness, retention, and compliance. So that's the hope that we'll tackle structural barriers and hopefully will continue to center DEI into our policies, structures, culture, and strategy. So it shouldn't be just a buzzword. It shouldn't just be a commitment that we say that will do these things. But in fact, there have been many instances where I was approached to give certain talks, and on the other end, they would make no commitment to do any follow-throughs after the talk. So
Now,
there,
Viola,
it requires a certain level of commitment.
I want to just quickly jump in, Nathan. I want to throw this over to you. Nathan, I'm going to paint a picture for you because this is one thing that's kind of at the heat of the debate, and I'm curious to see what you have to say about this, Nathan. So when we have two individuals up for the same job, both equally skilled, and the company has a quota to meet for, we need to reach, let's say, 20% of our workforce, 30% of our workforce being female. Let's just say that's an example. If there's a guy and a girl going up against each other for the same job, they're both equally skilled, and they choose the female to meet a quota, is that hiring based off of merit or quota, or am I missing something?
Well, if you're saying they're perfectly equally matched, then it is no longer a merit conversation. Then it's a matter of who is going to bring something to the culture. And so if I feel like this person's character or attitude, or they bring a certain perspective or lived experience that is going to add to the culture of the organization, then it's no longer a question about merit. It's they are bringing something unique that is of value to the organization.
Okay, that's a fair point. Now, Anne-Marie, is adding a percentage number, though, discriminatory to the other group who maybe isn't marginalized? Is adding that quota to say that a company needs to meet 30% due to whether it be public pressure to do that? We see that a lot with DEI policies. Or could it just be, let's remove the percentage and say, if this person's a good culture fit, then let's choose them. But let's not choose them based off of male or female. Like, can you break that down for me a little bit?
Absolutely. And you know what? 99% of companies don't choose based on male or female or a quota. The quota is language from the US. In Canada, we have employment equity goals, right? And what we're trying to do is actually say, in the market availability out there, so let's say 30% of graduated engineers are women, and in our workplace, in our environment here where we are looking for, engineers, are we doing everything we can to reach out to those 30% of women, right? If my workforce has only 2% of women. So that's just leveling the playing field to give opportunities for equally qualified candidates to know about the job and to apply. And so
Now, I
again,
want to jump in to, just to keep the conversation. Thank you for that. And I wanted, John, I want to throw it over to you because I was doing some research on trades. It was at 96% of electricians are male as of 2021. Only 4% are female. Do we need to level at what point are we forcing to level the playing field, or are women just not applying to be electrical tradespeople because they don't feel comfortable in a 96% dominated male industry?
I don't think it's that. I think that it's career preference choices. I think women tend to pick social careers where they're helping society. So maybe men are more picking isolated careers. I think we need more electricians in general. So I'm fine to promote more women in being electricians. I don't think that's but to say we need a 50-50 base of electricians to make everything equal doesn't make sense. And I just want to say, like, Toronto's already 55% visible minorities and 45% people identifying as European. That's our richest city. It would be very hard to have structural barriers in Toronto against visible minorities at this point. I mean, maybe 50 years ago, but right now it's almost impossible to have a functioning
John,
city.
Just to wrap up, because we've got about 30 seconds left here. Nathan, I want to let you kind of close it off. We don't have much time. So give me kind of a rundown of where you see DEI policies headed in the future.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, company culture, if we're talking like organization, is the ultimate competitive advantage.
All right, guys, that's literally all the time we have. This flew by, but thank you, everybody, tonight for joining me.